Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into deconstructing a highly charged, viral piece of commentary from the YouTube channel NERC News. Now, the source material makes some pretty aggressive allegations against Representative Ilhan Omar, weaving together claims of financial fraud, media bias, and political protectionism. And look, because these claims are incredibly heavy and honestly very politically polarizing, I want to be clear right up front. Our job today is not to take a side. We are stepping in as neutral, forensic auditors. We want to map out exactly how this source constructs its narrative and look at the specific data points they're using to make their case. So if you're looking to understand the architecture of these allegations without all the partisan shouting, you are in the exact right place. Let's get into it. Okay, let's dive right into this. To make sense of it all, we're breaking this argument down into four distinct pillars. First, the COVID fraud allegations. Second, the winery valuation mystery. Third, allegations of media silence. And finally, this overarching theory of a two-tiered system. All right, starting off with Section 1, the COVID fraud allegations. Let's unpack these feeding our future claims. $250 million. The source anchors its entire opening argument on this staggering number. Literally $250 million. This is the amount of COVID relief funds allegedly stolen in what federal prosecutors called one of the largest fraud operations in the entire country. But the source doesn't just toss this out as a dry statistic. They really weaponize it emotionally. They emphasize that this specific pool of money was intended to feed hungry children. By starting with a scandal of this sheer magnitude, NERC News is setting incredibly high stakes before they even name their specific political target. So from that massive number, how does the source actually connect Representative Omar to the fallout? Well, they make some very specific, methodical assertions. They claim that Minnesota Democrats actively blocked a subpoena that was designed to get materials from the Congresswoman. They also state that investigators are specifically hunting for communications between her and the convicted ringleader of the scheme. And it goes further. The source alleges this whole pattern of evasion. They claim she completely blew off a hard deadline to turn over requested info and just straight up skipped a scheduled hearing meant to examine her connections to the scandal. The narrative being built here is very clearly one of deliberate, active avoidance, allegedly aided by her political allies. Now, you might be wondering, how does the source validate all these claims? Well, they don't just rely on their own voice. They pull in external commentators to really reinforce this narrative of unchecked wrongdoing. For instance, they feature a quote from Michelle Tafoya, a Republican candidate for Senate in Minnesota. She states that the Congresswoman has remained somewhat untouchable and that, quote, "there is so much smoke here and I want to find the fire." By injecting voices like this, the source is trying to show that this frustration isn't just some isolated internet opinion. They're framing it as a legitimate concern shared by real political figures on the ground in Minnesota. Moving right along to Section 2, the winery valuation mystery. Let's take a closer look at these financial disclosures. And this brilliantly illustrates a massive discrepancy. The source shifts gears here to some highly personal financial anomalies. According to the commentary, Representative Omar originally filed a disclosure valuing her husband's businesses, which included a California winery, somewhere between $6 and $30 million. But then, an amended disclosure was filed. It blamed an accounting error and suddenly plummeted that valuation down to between $18,000 and $95,000. Now, the narrator doesn't present this massive drop as a simple clerical mistake. They frame it as a deeply suspicious retraction, asking the rhetorical question, how does someone accidentally think they're a multimillionaire? Watch how quickly this timeline builds. The source maps out this rapid sequence of events that they argue is highly incriminating. First, you have that high valuation reported. Next, the Congresswoman's finances come under investigation by the House GOP. Almost immediately after that scrutiny begins, boom, the financial disclosure is amended, wiping out millions in supposed net worth. And then, the final nail in the timeline, according to the video. Just days after that amendment, the winery in question, Est Cru, was legally dissolved. The source frames this rapid progression, investigation, amendment to solution as the literal collapse of a paper-thin financial illusion. To further dismantle the idea that this multi-million-dollar valuation was ever legitimate, the commentary pulls in data from a New York Post report. This report details how the Est Cru winery was basically plagued with problems. Allegedly, they only sold a handful of wines over several years. By 2024, the business reportedly faced lawsuits from unpaid winemakers and investors, and get this, held a grand total of just $650 in the bank. The video uses these grim financial realities to ask a pretty pointed question.
How could a business with only $650 to its name and a trail of lawsuits ever have been valued in the millions on a federal form?
All right, transitioning to Section 3, allegations of media silence. Let's look at the source's critique of the press. Here, the source draws a relentless, stark contrast regarding media coverage, claiming it's based entirely on a politician's affiliation. They argue, look, if a Republican were facing a $250 million fraud accusation or had a collapsing, suspicious winery, the establishment media would be all over it. We're talking wall-to-wall coverage, countdown clocks, emergency panels, threat to democracy graphics, the whole shebang. But they argue, when a Democrat faces the exact same fact pattern, the media suddenly becomes incredibly careful, quiet, and procedural. It's mostly just silence. The video asserts that this story has basically been relegated to the internet, while legacy media treats it like radioactive material. To prove this idea that the political establishment actively deflects scrutiny, the source points to a quote from Democratic House Leader Hakeem Jeffries. When asked about these financial disclosures, Jeffries dismisses the issue, stating the Congresswoman is, quote, constantly under attack by right-wing conspiracy theorists. The narrator immediately pounces on this. They claim this is a coordinated, well-worn script. They argue politicians use the phrase right-wing conspiracy as this universal shield to just shut down questioning. It's a fascinating look at how political buzzwords are allegedly deployed to deflect accountability and completely control the narrative. Finally, we zoom out to Section 4, the two-tiered system. Let's examine identity politics and accountability. To argue that this isn't just an isolated incident, but rather a systemic issue, the source methodically lays out additional ongoing investigations to portray a clear pattern of rule-breaking. They allege the Congresswoman tried to steer a $1 million federal earmark to a Somali addiction facility that, strangely enough, shared an address with a restaurant. An earmark, the source notes, was only removed after Republicans flagged it. They also bring up claims made by conservative figure Stephen Miller, alleging there's proof she lied on her immigration forms, a matter the video says is currently under review. By stacking all these allegations right on top of the COVID fraud and the winery collapse, the source is really trying to paint a picture of someone who repeatedly and flagrantly tests the boundaries of the law. So the crucial point is how the source ties all these individual claims into one massive cultural argument. They claim there's an entire political ecosystem out there where certain people are essentially rendered untouchable. Basic criticism? Well, that's framed as racism. Standard oversight? Labeled as dangerous. The ultimate contrast they draw is between these protected, highly connected political elites who can allegedly just wave away a $250 million fraud scandal and regular, everyday Americans. Americans who are facing strict IRS audits over mundane, minor Venmo transactions. That specific contrast, the source argues, is what is absolutely driving everyday people up the wall. Which brings us to the final, provocative thought the source leaves its audience with. After laying out all the financial anomalies, the fraud connections, and the alleged media cover-ups, the narrator asks, do Americans actually still buy the right-wing conspiracy excuse every single time a politician gets caught in another scandal? When you step back and look at the architecture of this argument, the financial data, the timelines, the media critiques, you really see how comprehensively this narrative of systemic bias is built. So the question you have to answer for yourself is, where exactly is the line between legitimate oversight and political targeting? Keep analyzing the media you consume, and always, always ask the hard questions.